Welcome to Envision More. Here, we dig deep into the insights of first-generation wealth builders, unearthing stories of passion, resilience, and relentless vision. Your host is Wayne Wagner Jr., founder of Visionary Wealth Management. So sit back and dig in. It's time to envision more.
Hey, this is Wayne Wagner from Visionary Wealth Management. This is another episode of the Envision More podcast. We are continuing with our kind of mini series on planning by decade to talk about how we should be thinking, functioning in each decade of life. Today, we're going to be working on your 40s. And so we've done some planning in the 20s. We've done some planning in the 30s. Today, we're going to do planning in your 40s. And the 40s is a fascinating decade because life is getting real now. And there is typically a lot of responsibility in every area of life. And this has come because you're typically going to be married at this point. You're frequently going to have children at this stage, by this stage of life, or you and your spouse are maybe going through some big fertility questions, trying to figure out, hey, can we and are we going to have kids if you're in your early 40s and having those conversations? So there's some big things going on in life. And at work, when you were young, they didn't put you in charge of a lot because they couldn't put you in charge of a lot because you didn't know enough. You needed the scars that you have. You needed to make the mistakes you've made. You needed to have that little bit of gray hair that's starting to sprout out that some of us are still covering up. But we needed to get to this point so that we could be trusted to make bigger decisions, have bigger impact. With that, we're going to talk about some of the opportunities that come along because of that. But it is financially and strategically the 40s. If you haven't gotten serious yet, this is when you have to get serious. And you have to get serious on a number of fronts. And we're going to talk about some of that today. But let's review a couple of big, hairy headline kind of financial planning principles that we work through. Number one, the rule of 72. The rule of 72 states that if you take your anticipated rate of return and divide it into the number 72, that will tell you how many years it takes for your money to double. And the inverse is also true. Take the number of years that you expect that your money to double, and you can get the rate of return that you have to get. Now, I'm recording this in late 2024, and it's been a pretty good couple of years for the market. And so if you look at the last 2 years and you say, hey, I expect to get 18% rate of return on my investments, then you should expect your money to double in 4 years. Now, anybody who's been investing for longer than 2 years will tell you that that's an unrealistic long-term average rate of return. And certainly any investment advisor who's telling you to expect those kinds of returns, don't walk out of that office, run. So, let's just manage expectations. Long-term rates of return on equities are typically between 7 and 9%. There's certainly periods of time where they've been higher than that, but we also have to remember that in our lifetime, from 2000 to 2009, that 10-year period of time, the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones all put up a zero over a decade. And so there was, we hit 2000 after Y2K, took a dive for 3 years, came back to all-time highs, and then hit 2008 and hadn't climbed out of that hole again by 2009. So in our lifetime, there have been decades where the stock market has delivered zero return. And so that can't be too far from our frontal lobe memory when we are thinking about preparing for longer-term strategic planning. So with that in mind, though, the rule of 72 is going to help us figure out how many times our money can double between now and retirement. And so if we're thinking about, let's say, a 9% rate of return, it would be on the high end of the historical averages, but a 9% average annual return means your money's going to double about every 8 years. Well, if you're in your 40s and you're wanting to retire in your 60s, that means you have at most 3 more doubles on your money. Now, why is that important? It's important because We have been preaching in your 20s and 30s to jam as much money as you can in your Roth 401k, in your Roth IRA. Start 529 plans as soon as you can for the kids. Save money in investment. We've been saying that and preaching that because when you're in your 20s and 30s, you have the potential to get 4, 5, maybe 6 doubles out of this money, which means putting $1,000 away and getting 6 doubles out of it means you're going to have $64,000 in retirement for every $1,000 you put away on the front end. Well, now if you're in your 40s and you're only going to get 3 doubles out of it, that means $1,000 becomes 2,000, 4,000, 8,000. So the difference between investing in your 40s and getting 3 doubles instead of investing in your 20s and getting 6 doubles is the difference between 8,000 per thousand and 64,000. That's a hell of a penalty for not investing early. But that's the fact of the matter. It's also why we want to work multi-generationally with you when your kids hit their 20s to help them accelerate their saving and investing as well. But that rule of 72 is really important to thinking about how much we can accumulate between now and retirement. Now, there's good news and bad news here, because if you've done a great job, you've been, let's say, maxing out your 401k or putting as much as you can in your 401k, or you've been setting aside dollar cost averaging money into a mutual fund or into a portfolio over a long period of time, and you pick your head up in your 40s and you go, wow, I've got 800,000, I've got $1 million, we've got $2 million, we've got maybe $3 million in net worth. Well, if you've got 2 million and you're going to get 3 more doubles, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 8 becomes 16. That's a pretty good tailwind if you've got a couple million put away at this point. And we're going to come back to another principle in just a minute, the 4% rule. But think about that. You know, if you've got 2 million set aside now in your 40s and you're going to get 2 or 3 more doubles, well, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and that's without saving or investing any more money. So, you know, it could be a comforting thing to think about. It could also be, hey, you know, we've just lived in, and we figured that we'd save in our 40s and 50s, and that was what we were going to do because we spent everything that came in our 20s and 30s, and now we're in our 40s and we're looking at it, say, hey, I've got $50,000 saved for retirement. Okay, well, 50 is going to become 100, is going to become 200, maybe it's going to become 400, but based on your lifestyle, based on your cash flow needs, 400,000 by retirement is not going to be close to what you think you're going to need or what you're going to need during retirement. And if that's the case, then you know that you're facing some headwinds. You know you have to get serious, and the time to get serious if you're in your 40s and you're in that situation is now, not 10 years from now. Right. So we need to get serious about this stuff. Now, think about this on another major principle we work through, which is the 4% rule. The 4% rule says that historically speaking, no guarantees, but, you know, past performance is no guarantee of future results. But historically speaking, over long periods of time, if you are not pulling more than 4% of your capital from your bucket of money at retirement. So in other words, if you have $1 million of investments and you're not pulling more than $40,000 a year out of that bucket, then your money should last as long as you do. So let me say that again. As long as you're not pulling more than 4% a year out of your bucket of capital, your money should last as long as you do. And so that 4% rule is really critical, because go back to, is this a tailwind or is this a headwind situation? If you've got a couple million put away and 2 is going to become 4 and 4 is going to become 8, well, 4% of 8 million is $320,000 a year. And so now inflation's going to adjust. So 320,000, 20 or 25 years from now is not what 320,000 is today. So let's adjust expectations accordingly there. But fact of the matter is, you know, if you're sitting in that situation, you say, let's say that, you know, $320,000 is going to be worth half as much as it would be today. So today that would be about $160,000 a year. So if you've got a couple million and you think you're going to be able to leave that money alone and continue adding to it over time, and you get a couple more doubles out of that money, you're in a pretty good spot. If you're not, as I said, it's really time to get serious. So those two rules, rule of 72 tells you how much you need to earn each year, which means maybe how much you need to have in stocks versus bonds versus CDs and cash. And then the rule of the 4% rule that says how much can we pull out of a bucket of capital and expect not to have that bucket leaking so much that it runs out of water by the time before we die. So those two things are really important. Now, as you're in your 40s, if you're in your 40s, you and I both know that this is a heavy, heavy lifting period of time. Kids are starting to be more demanding, more needy. There's now sports events and activities. There's more school events. There's more other extracurricular activities that they're involved in. So they're being pulled in different directions. We're starting to think about, oh my goodness, we're 6, 8, 10 years away from college. Do we have a plan? What is the plan? How should we be thinking about that? Vacation, everything is more expensive. Just to go on vacation, when it was you and your wife or you and your husband, you could get away with one hotel room. And even when you had one or two little itty bitties, you could put them in a crib or put them on a cot and everything was okay. Now to go on vacation, gosh, you need an apartment or you need a house or you need an Airbnb, and it's way more expensive to think about it. Everything becomes more expensive. So as we're doing that, you're also facing you're facing opportunities and headwinds, or tailwinds and headwinds, in your family life. And we're going to talk about that spousal relationship. We're going to talk about the relationship with the kids in a couple of minutes. But we're also need to be thinking strategically and not getting lethargic in how we approach your profession and your career, like a business owner, like someone who's managing an asset. So I have a client who was the head of people development for a large pharmaceutical company, and they did a long-term study, and they studied people within the pharmaceutical organization on the commercial side. This is the 26-year-old MBA that they hire into a sales organization role as a sales rep, or that person maybe by the time they're 30, they're moving up into a district sales manager role or something like that. And then they studied the other side. That's the commercial organization. And then they looked at the medicinal or the physician side of the business. This would be, a newly minted 28 or 38-year-old MD who's coming into the research side of the organization. And so, and what they found over time is that those commercial organization people were applying and looking and reaching for the next role on average every 18 months. And on the medical side of the organization, those people would stay in the same role for an average of 8 to 10 years. And they just were very fascinated by the work. They were drilling down and digging into and learning their craft at how to fight diseases, how to use this molecule to fight that tumor. And they would just head down focus. And the problem organizationally, what they saw was they would hire that MD in at about a $50,000 premium above what they were hiring that MBA grad in at. But then 20 or 25 years later, those two same people, the physician had barely matriculated up and was making more money, but wasn't making dramatically more money. But the commercial person was now making twice as much money as the MD, because they had moved like 4 times as many times throughout their career. They moved from this role to that role to that role to that new company, to this other role, to that new company. So there were a lot more moves. And so institutionally, what he was trying to craft was a culture code to take those physicians and say, hey, we want to pay you more. We want to encourage and enable you to earn more, because you're driving more value. But the way you drive more value is by bringing all of who you are and picking up and moving into a new room. Let's take everything you've learned on that molecule and help apply it to this new molecule. And so they wanted to let's motivate the MDs to move on average about every 3 years. And then let's go to those commercial people who are trying to move every 18 months and kind of go, whoa, hold your horses a little bit. You're not even figuring out how to actually excel in the role that you're doing before you move on to the next one. And systemically, institutionally, that's a formula for promoting incompetence potentially. It's potentially damaging. We may actually be doing damage to you as a leader because we're not allowing you to develop in a healthy way for roughly a 3-year period of time. So let's take the first year in a role, learn the role. Second year in a role, here's the list of things I want to do to change this role, to improve it, to improve efficiencies, improve output. And then in the third year, we're going to evaluate those changes from the second year. And so by the end of the third year, we've taken you through learn the role, improve the role, evaluate the outcomes of your improvements to the role. And now you're ready to move on to the next thing. And you've learned lessons, you've got systems in place, and systemically and institutionally, we've documented that, and now we can repeat it. And so this was a fascinating study that he was undertaking in a major organization. And the thought process that they were doing, though, was to really think through and develop their people more intentionally. And that's something that every large organization should be doing, number one. But number two, let's turn that on its head. It's something every one of us should be doing, right? And so we may find ourselves in this stage of life where, hey, the kids are in school, we wouldn't want to uproot them. Or we want our kids to be able to finish in this middle school or that junior high or that high school. And so, or my wife and I are now part of the fabric of this community. We don't want to have to move geographically. And so, well, that means that there may be less potential financial rewards in your profession, in your career over the next 15 or 20 years. Now, that is an acceptable trade-off if it's an acceptable trade-off if we have met, we have talked about it, we have perhaps meditated or prayed on it. It's appropriate if we are articulating that, if this is an agreed on value within our family that dad is not going to pursue or mom is not going to pursue the career that they potentially could have, because this season is so important for the growth of the family. And there are 1,000 of these trade-offs and 1,000 things that are more valuable than just accumulating more wealth, but we have to talk about it. And I bring this up because your 40s is where spouses can and frequently do lose one another in the fog of war. And you talk about damaging things to your financial plan, divorce is got to be the top one or two. And it is by far the most systemic and endemic in our society, where half of there was a comedian that said, 44% of divorces end in, or 44% of marriages end in divorce. That also means that 56% of marriages end in death. And so there was a kind of a punchline there, and a ha ha he he, I'd rather end in divorce than death. Well, but what I really, right? Because financially speaking, divorce, my formula for divorce, my definition of divorce is to take at least 20% of your net worth and set it on fire with a lighter called attorney fees, and then figure out, have the attorneys fight over how you're going to divvy up the other 80%. So each of you walk out with about 40% of the net worth of what you started with. And let me tell you, I've seen it go way worse than that. So on both sides. So set more on fire with the attorneys. Each of you walk away with even less. And so we've seen some ugly situations. I always joke with my wife that she can kill me, but she can't divorce me, because I do not want to I have learned too much from going through dozens of divorces with dozens of clients over the years. That's not a trade track I want to be on ever. So, but back to my point, this idea of agreed on values. And so if you have not begun to establish, begun to discuss, articulate, dig into some curriculum between you and your spouse, and now your kids are getting to a point where they can think through this too, establishing and articulating these things with our kids. Who are we as a family? My family, we're Wagners. We show up for one another. We're Wagners. We can talk about anything without judgment. We're Wagners. We're entrepreneurs, not for the purpose of building wealth, but for the purpose of controlling our time and building opportunity. And so these core values, these core established, this is how we want to show up. And this is where this discussion around pursuing career as high and as far as it can go, or hey, I'm going to accept a role where I am. I'm going to add more and more and more value. I'm going to make myself so valuable to this organization. They never want to let me go, but I'm not going to matriculate into the upper echelons. I had a client who was responsible for about $15 billion a year in pharmaceutical sales, and he was in the succession plan to be CEO of the company. And the company at the time was about a $30 billion a year company. And he came home from the meeting where they told him that he was going to, he was in that succession plan. And he said, Wayne, I'll never take that role. Every single person I've seen in the next two roles above me has been divorced at least once, and most of them more than once. I love my wife, I love my family, and I don't care if I never have another job above this one, and I don't care if they kick me out of this one. But I will not take one of those roles, because those roles destroy marriages. Conscious decision. Now, that the guy was going to be fine. He had an 8-figure net worth. He was fine. He is fine. Their family, and he and his wife are still married and still deeply in love. But he was making a conscious decision that the next promotion is the one that kills marriages. And I won't allow that to happen to me. And I'm not going to naively say it can't happen to me. And the only way I can guarantee that it can't happen to me is if I never put myself in the room with that decision. So that's a core personal value for that guy. He was functioning at a very high level in a very successful organization. And he was being asked to consider taking on more. And so, but that was his decision at that point, that he didn't want to make that next move. And so, having those conversations, and most of us will never be faced with quite that big a decision, right? Do you want to go from making $3 to $5 million a year to making $8 to $10 million a year? That's a pretty big decision to make, right? Most of us won't be faced with that, but making those decisions, articulating that discussion, not just internally, but externally with our partner, incorporating that into and inviting, maybe your kids are in middle school and junior high, and you want to invite them into the conversation. Hey, look, if mom takes this next promotion, it could mean a geographic move. Or mom's being offered a job to go take a job with another company. It's going to mean we have to change schools. We have to move again. And you let the kids have a say. And it's not that you have to take them. We don't give them a veto vote, but we give them a say. We invite them into the discussion. We incorporate that into how we're thinking and functioning as a family. And what that does is that reinforces trust with our kids, because they see mom and dad as caring about what they think about these decisions that do impact them, and B, mom and dad are humans. Mom and dad don't have it all right. And there's this image that our kids are always faced with, this image of my mom and dad are perfect, they never have any problems. Contrasting that against media, which says mom and dad are bumbling idiots that are too consumed with their own lives to care about you as their child. Right. So our kids are constantly faced with these two competing views of the world. My parents are perfect, and every parent is a bumbling idiot, too consumed with their own problems to care about their children. And we've got to be at war against both of those to build effective community with our kids. And part of the way we do that is by regularly coming back to our core values. How do we want to show up? And then when there are big decisions to be made, inviting everyone into the discussion. Again, we don't necessarily give 8-year-olds veto power, right? And we certainly don't give children kicking and screaming on grocery store floors veto power. We don't put up with that nonsense, right? But we do invite them into the conversation and at a level that they're able to digest and participate. So that is and that's really important, a really important part of this. So I want to get into I guess one final thought here. Establishing these kind of core values or shared agreements within the family is a crucial piece. And if you haven't done that in your 30s and you're now entering into your 40s, you're in your 40s, I want to encourage you strongly to commit some time to do that, to spend time talking about it, to spend time thinking about it, to spend time journaling, writing about it, and then articulating that specifically in writing. And I cannot tell you in my own family how valuable that is to be able to, have articulated language where each one of us can be held accountable in any given situation. There's never a time when there's one of us shows up the way we're not supposed to, and it's what's wrong with you? Or, some kind of presumption of just, this person just is weak, or they're a loser, or there's no communication of that and no perception of that. It's always hey, here's our articulated vision for how we show up. It just felt like you didn't have an interest or didn't have the motivation to do that in this situation. How can I come alongside you to support you so that next time we're in that situation? Remembering that the problem's the problem, the person is not the problem. We don't attack people, we attack problems. And the problem may be how that person showed up, but it's not the person, it's how they showed up. That's the issue. And so we invite one another to our higher and better selves in alignment with our articulated values. So with that in mind, I want to get to, so I know you're listening to this going, hey, Wayne, all right, that's really neat. Relationships and values and, core discussions and really, all this kind of stuff. But like, how do I plan? What do I do financially in my 40s? So let's talk, we're going to just talk defense and offense. Okay. Defense is estate planning, number one. So if you've moved between states to chase your career, make sure your estate planning documents are updated. Number one. Number two, I want you to start thinking 3-dimensionally and 3-generationally in terms of the estate plan, because in your 30s, when you were having newbies and you had little ones at home and you were thinking, hey, is my brother going to take care of the kids if my wife and I get hit by a bus, or is it going to be her sister that takes the kids? Who can we trust with? And should we put the trustee of the trust where all the money is going to sit in the hands of the same person that has custody of the kids? Or should maybe we use her brother and my sister to serve two different functions in that process? Now I want you to start thinking, hey, not just, hey, what if we need somebody to take care of the money and somebody to take care of the kids? What happens if my wife and I go down in a plane crash when our kids are in college or our kids are in their early 20s? Because we want to plan for right now, but we also want those documents to be able to address the future potential scenarios. Because if my wife and I go down and there's a whole bunch of life insurance and there's a house and there's a vacation home and there's a retirement accounts and all of this gets dumped on my 20 and 23-year-old kids, well, they're not ready to deal with all that. And there might be enough there for them to make some really bad decisions and do harm to themselves and their families down the road. So we want to be thinking in those estate plans, start thinking multi-generationally in terms of how we would want money distributed to the kids over what period of time, for what reasons, and then codify that in the estate planning document. So that's part of playing defense. Insurances, there are specifically two kinds of insurance: disability insurance and life insurance. Listen, we need property and casualty coverage on the car, on the house, to protect the stuff we have. But if you're in your 40s, you are getting into your higher, moving towards your peak earning years. That little bit of gray hair has earned you some credibility. You can now show up and add real value. And so protecting that earning capacity is really, really important at this point. And so if you don't have enough life insurance in place now is the time to get it. Again, not 10 years from now, because 10 years from now, listen, we can go buy you 20-year level term insurance, 20-year level term life insurance today for a lot less per thousand than we can buy you 10-year level term insurance 10 years from now. Okay, let me say that again. We can buy you 20-year level term insurance that will cover the next 20 years of your life for a lot less and a cost per thousand than we can buy the same amount of coverage 10 years from now, and it only cover 10 years. So we're literally spending less money per year and getting the coverage to stretch out for 20 years. Doing that in your 40s versus in your 50s is way cheaper. Number one, okay? Number two, same thing on a disability insurance side. The other big thing we see is that clients will move through these roles in their career and they get into their 40s, and you've got a base salary, but hey, you've also got a bonus. You've also got long-term incentives. And then you look at it, and one of the more egregious situations I saw was we had a client who had about a $600,000 base salary. Bonus target was another 300,000. Long-term incentives were another 500,000. So 600 plus 300 plus 5, $1.4 million annual income. The company's long-term disability coverage that they provided for free to my client, that he just assumed was, well, I'm covered. I get disability insurance through work. Maxed out at $10,000 a month. Complete max out, no coverage beyond that, and the $10,000 a month, because the company was paying the premiums, was taxable, would have been taxable to him. So if he were disabled, he literally would have gone from $1.4 million a year in income to $5,000 a month, or excuse me, $10,000 a month, taxable. So call it $6,000 a month. So, ouch. And once that earning stops, all of the future investment stops, all of the future accumulation, all the future contributions to retirement accounts, all the future contributions to kids' 529 accounts, all of that stops, and the family's got to figure out how to make it by on $6,000 a month or so. That's just not going to happen. So the purpose of individual disability coverage is to actually take a look at what the company is providing, figure out what those caps are, what those maxes are, and most importantly, what it doesn't cover. Virtually none of those corporate policies cover commissions, bonuses, or long-term incentives. And so it's really crucial to take a look at, and you may need to spend a few $1,000s. You may need to spend, if you're in the upper echelon, you may need to spend $6,000 to $10,000 a year in premiums to pick up the disability coverage to try to make sure that your family's protected if you go down for the count. And it's it's not the car wreck that kills you, it's the car wreck that disables you that we're worried about, right? So it's not the illness that kills you, it's the illness that debilitates you and leaves you not able to do the work that you're doing now that's driving that 6-figure, 7-figure income. So playing defense is estate planning, life insurance planning, disability insurance planning. And then there's some other things on the investment side of just making sure that there's sufficient cash available, doing things like making sure if you've got a home, don't just leave dead equity. Go open up an equity line of credit. Not that you need the money, but here's the way banks function. When you don't need the money, they will extend you an unlimited supply of credit. Think about when you were in college. You could get a credit card for $10,000 and you could borrow $200,000 to pay for a college degree in basket weaving. Nobody did any underwriting. It's only when you can't pay it back when you need the money that the banks are like, whoa, whoa, hey, you need money. You seem a little desperate. We're not ready to give you the money. So if you have a real estate asset, go out, open up an equity line of credit on that. Might cost you a couple $100 a year to keep that line of credit open. It's not that you need it. It's just access to capital. If that job goes away, you go in transition, you've got a big opportunity or a life-changing financial event for good or bad. Access to that capital is really, really important. So think about some of these things: estate planning, life and disability insurance planning, enough cash on hand, proper property and casualty coverages, equity lines of credit on pieces of real estate. This is all playing defense. On the offensive side, this is where we are going to go back to the retirement accounts in a minute. But on the non-retirement side, we want you to be thinking about beginning to accumulate money outside your retirement accounts in just an investment account, a non-retirement brokerage account, or a non-retirement investment account. We also want to be using 529 accounts aggressively to save for the kids' college education and college costs. We're not afraid to have too much money in those 529 accounts, because remember two things related to those 529 accounts. Number one, if there's money left over, actually three things. Number one, if there's money left over, we can change it to another kid. Right. So if we've got too much in the first one, finishes college and there's still money left over, we can flip that money into the name of the second child, third child, fourth child. So we can change the beneficiary within our family. Number one. Number two, child finishes up. Let's say your last kid finishes up. We can move money from that 529 account into a Roth IRA up to $35,000 in the name of that beneficiary. Number two. Number three, we can change the owner downstream. We can change the owner of the 529 account to your child and rename the beneficiary to be your grandchild. Now, we need to actually have the grandchild. We need the social security number and date of birth to actually do that. But we can make those shifts and shift that wealth downstream. And if you think that, we were talking on the front end of this about, only having 2 or 3 doubles left. Well, think about money you've got put in your 529 account for your 10-year-old right now that could be accumulating until your grandchild goes to college. How many doubles are you going to get out of that money? That's why we want to be aggressively saving and aggressively using the 529 accounts. Okay. On the retirement accounts, we want to talk about a few things here, and then we want to talk about deferred comp plans. So first of all, if your adjusted gross income is below about $400,000, the top end of the 24% tax bracket right now, as we're recording this, about $383,000, $385,000. So if your AGI is at that level or below, then we absolutely want to be contributing, if at all possible, to your 401k on a Roth basis. On a Roth basis, not on a pre-tax basis. Now, the logic, we've said this in the previous 2 podcast episodes, but the logic here on using the Roth versus the pre-tax is that you are paying taxes on the seed, the money you're investing right now, so that the harvest during retirement is tax-free. So remember, if you put $20,000 in your 401k, you take the tax deduction right now, you're in a 24% tax bracket. You saved about, let's say, 75, or you saved about $5,000, $20,000 contribution. You saved about $5,000. That money goes in, doubles 3 more times. 20 becomes 40, becomes 80, becomes 160,000 by the time you retire. When you retire, I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket. No, you're not. I'll try to avoid using profanity, but it's bullcrap to believe that. Everybody thinks they're going to be a lower tax bracket. I can prove it to you. You and your wife are both going to have Social Security. The Social Security or the tax bracket for hitting the 22% tax bracket, the income for that is about $90,000. Well, your Social Security payments are going to be like $70,000. So you got just a precious little bit and if you've got some non-retirement money, your interest and income from your bond portfolio and interest from your bank account is going to push you up to the 90,000. So now you're right back in the 22% to 24% tax bracket. So you took the cookie on the front end, but now you're getting hit with big tax bills on the back end. And so we want to avoid that by putting as much money as we can into Roth 401k and Roth IRAs. If your adjusted gross income is below about $400,000, use the Roth whenever and wherever possible, right? So that's on your 401k. Number two, we want to talk about doing backdoor Roth IRAs. Strategy that we use for a lot of our clients is hey, we make too much money to be able to put money into a Roth IRA. But there's a strategy called a backdoor Roth IRA that allows you to set up an IRA account, contribute to that IRA on a non-deductible basis. Say, hey, I'm going to put $7,000 into this IRA. IRS, I'm going to put $7,000 into this IRA. It's not deductible to me. But then the next day you convert it into a Roth. The IRS says you make too much money. You can't do a Roth contribution, but you can say right back to them, but I can do a Roth conversion. I know it starts with C, but you guys view it differently. And so we can do backdoor Roth IRAs, and that allows us to jam an extra $7,000 or $8,000 a year per spouse into Roth retirement savings. So then we go back to the 401k again. We say, hey, you're allowed right now to put about $72,000 a year total. I think this year I think next year it's going to 72. This year it's 69,000. About $69,000. And let's say I'm 45 years old and I'm putting my $23,000 away, and then the company's matching another $15,000. So I've got $38,000 put in there between my Roth contributions and the company's matching contributions. There's still room for me to put after-tax money in the 401k. Now, why on earth would I want to put after-tax money in my 401k? It's for this reason. Under current tax law, we can convert when you leave your company and roll that money out to an IRA. The Roth contributions are going to roll out to a Roth IRA. That's real simple. The company's contributions are going to roll out to a traditional IRA, which is pre-tax IRA. The after-tax money that you've jammed in your 401k is able to be rolled into the Roth IRA. Okay, so the growth on it has to stay in a retirement account. But if we can get an extra $20,000 or $30,000 a year after tax jammed into your 401k, we do that for 5, 8, 10, 15 years, we can literally get hundreds of thousands of dollars eligible for Roth conversion. And we're thinking three-dimensionally, thinking strategically to do that. We're storing up that money on a post-tax basis inside your 401k, anticipating when you leave, we'll be able to roll that out to a Roth IRA. Again, your specific situations, you have to talk with your CPA and your financial advisor. If you're not getting the kind of support you need on this, give us a call and we'll sit down and have this conversation with you. But these are the major tenets. So 401k contributions, Roth if you're below about 400,000. Make sure you're maximizing those contributions. So remember, 99% of 401k plans are set up like this. They match on a paycheck by paycheck by paycheck basis. Okay, which means any paycheck you don't contribute to, they don't match to. So don't get sucked into that. Oh, I put 20% of my income aside, and by the time I get my bonus in March or April, I'm completely maxed out for the year. That means you're missing matching contributions for the rest of the freaking year. Okay, be aware of that, be conscious of that, and plan accordingly. So use Roth contributions. Make sure you're spreading your contributions out through the whole year. Use backdoor Roth IRA strategies. Come back, put after-tax money into your 401k if you've got space kind of between what you've put in, what the company's put in, and that max cap for qualified plans. And then if you're making above about $280,000 a year, many companies have what's called a deferred comp plan. Now, these plans, we've got to be careful with these things because we've seen way too many people overuse these things. Remember what I said? if you're in that, especially if you're in that $300,000 to $400,000 in annual income in AGI, you could be thinking, hey, I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket when I'm retired. And it's like, no, you're really not. Number one. Okay. So, hey, deferring the tax liabilities till some future point in time and thinking I'm going to be in a lower bracket. That may or may not be true, but let's be optimistic. Let's say, hey, you are making $800,000 a year in household income. You're in the top tax bracket. You're in the 37% federal bracket, and whatever the highest is for your state, you're getting just mugged on the tax liability. And you go, hey, I want to put some money away for a future year or for a future point in time. Or I'm going to have them pay this money out to me annually over the first 10 years of my retirement. All of those things are really are great ways to think about it. I used a deferred comp plan when I knew that I was going to have my daughter graduating from high school and going to college and my 25th anniversary in the same year. I knew that having some money come back to me in that year was going to be helpful because there was no way I wasn't going to have a cash crunch in that year. So you can use these things if you've got some kind of triangulation of, oh, hey, we're going to have 2 kids in college, or we're going to, that 1 year, we're going to have 3 kids in college. Rethinking how fast we had those kids right now. But if you're thinking that way and looking down the road, you might take income from this year and defer it into that year. Now, here's the challenge. Here's the twist. Most times, most of these plans are set up to say, yep, all of this works fine as long as you're still working for the company, or as long as you retire from the company with certain age and years of service and all that. The challenge is with as many different changes and inflections as we get from our career strategy and our career progress, as many different changes that we see people make, frequently you don't end up at the same company when you're on the back end. And those plans are not portable between companies. So what ends up happening is I'm going to take a severance package at 47 to leave because I negotiated a great job and a great promotion with a startup. And then 6 months later or 13 months later, depending on the plan, all of the money in that plan gets dumped out and it's all taxable. And I left the company in March and it paid out 6 months later. I got a severance package from the company. I got a sign-on package from the new company, and I got my whole deferred comp plan paid out to me all in the same year. I only thought I had problems. I was great. I was in great shape. I was making $700,000, $800,000 a year. But this year I got a $2.5 million income. Holy crap. Right. So we want to be careful about how we use these things and not have too much build up in these things over time. So we want to be careful about that, cautious about that. So here we've played some defense, we've played some offense. This is kind of how we want to be thinking in your 40s. And we want to be thinking strategically in terms of protecting our marriage, protecting our conversations and connection with our kids, right? These are some of the things we want to be working on strategically because listen, family planning to protect your marriage, planning to stay connected and articulating core values and relationship goals with your spouse. This is prophylactic planning against divorce, and divorce is really, really freaking expensive. And nobody gets out unscathed. It hurts. Ask anybody who's been through it. It's just a painful process, and it is like setting a huge percentage of your net worth on fire. And so, speaking financially very pragmatically, the number one thing I can encourage you to do is don't get divorced. Hey, listen, the statistics are the statistics. 44% of all marriages end in divorce. We're going to be here for the fight. We're going to be here to support you through it. If it does happen to you, we're going to work through it. We're going to help you recalibrate and reset expectations and all the rest. But if we can avoid it by making some strategic investments, by all means, let's make those investments and make those course corrections while we can plan for it on this side of the event. Okay. I hope that this has been a valuable hour for you. I hope you listen to this at 1.5 or 2.0 speed. I know I talk fast, but I think you can still get the content if you pull it in faster. But this is Wayne Wagner for the Envision More podcast. This has been Planning in Your 40s. Have a great 2025. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Envision More podcast with Wayne Wagner Jr. of Visionary Wealth Management. We hope you were encouraged and inspired by the conversation today. If you want to dig deeper into the show notes or Wayne's work at Visionary, you can find us at envisionmore.com. That's Envision with a Z. Advisory services are provided through Wealth Plan Investment Management. Wealth Plan Investment Management and Visionary Wealth Management are separate entities. The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Thanks for listening.